Hello everyone, hope you're doing alright. Today I have for you lethality gameplay using the locked and loaded and tacticians packages for our legendaries, and then the viral elements for that big AoE and single target damage. Here are my ability tree choices. Feel free to copy them if you so choose. However, for the most part of today's video, it's not going to be actually focused on the gameplay itself. I wanted to talk about kind of a weird topic, which is common terms in MMOs that everyone kind of is expected to know, but no one has really sat down and explained it to you. So if you're a newbie to the MMO scene, you might not have heard of these before, especially in SWTOR, there are a couple of unique ones. So I figured I'd sit down and provide a little guide into some of the more common acronyms or terminology that you might see in your MMO experience that you might not hear anywhere else. Now, this isn't going to be anything mind-blowing if you've played MMOs before, but hopefully this will be useful for some of you that are just getting into the scene. So the first common acronym is just DPS. DPS stands for damage per second. It's essentially measuring how much damage are you doing, but it's used interchangeably to describe players who are designed essentially to kill things, right? So if you hear someone say, I'm a DPS, that means that they are damage dealers. Their job is to take health bars from 100% to 0%. So if you see people saying, hey, I'm a DPS, apparently that's faster than saying I'm a person that does damage. So if you see DPS, just know that means, hey, I'm a damage dealer. Another common acronym is DOT. DOT stands for damage over time. It's an ability that does a small amount of damage at the beginning of the cast, but slowly ticks over time. There's a lot of specs that are built around DOT abilities. You can see right now I have my corrosive grenade and my corrosive dart on this target. You can see they're all exploding slowly over a long period of time. The benefits of dots is that, for one, you don't have to do all your damage up front, and then once you place the dot on the target, you can then do more damaging abilities to them later. Additionally, the dots stay on the target for a long time, so you can kind of tab off if you really want to. Additionally, there are ways to spread your dots around. This is known as dot spreading. Most damage over time specs that have dots have a mechanic that allow you to spread your dots from one target to the other. So right now, if I have both my dots on this gunslinger, I can use like my toxic haze to spread my dots to every other target in the area. A lot of classes have a very similar mechanic. Just read your class description, especially if you go into your skill tree on the right-hand side, there's those set abilities. Read those, it'll tell you what abilities you can use to spread your dots around. Dot spreading is usually done by using AoE abilities, which is the next acronym we're going to discuss very quickly. AoE stands for Area of Effect abilities. These are any abilities that can hit multiple targets at once. Most of the time, they will show up as big red circles on the ground if they are from an enemy, or big green circles on the ground if they are from a friend. So if you see any large circles chilling on the ground, that means that an Area of Effect ability is happening. Area of Effect is linked very closely with the idea of Cleave, which is essentially focusing your damage on one target and then using your AoE damage to spread to other targets. So if you're going to cleave off of the boss onto the adds, you would be focusing the majority of your damage onto the boss and then using your AoE and your dot spread to apply damage to the edge kind of passively. You're tunneling into the boss and then you're cleaving onto the smaller targets. Now let's talk objective shorthand as well, because this can get a little confusing, especially if you're just jumping into SWTOR. Starting with the phrase, for example, Inc. East 2. Inc., the beginning of this, stands for incoming. It basically says, I have people on my way. Basically, it means send help, right? But we can't just say Inc. without giving context. We have to tell our teammates where exactly we are and where we need to get help from. And when it comes to objectives, sometimes it can be hard to describe specifics about where the objective is or where you need help. So to get around this, players will oftentimes call out objective locations by their relation to the minimap. So in the example we said Inc. East 2, that means if you pop open your minimap, you look at the objective that's furthest on the east, and that's where I currently am. As long as you can remember, never eat your soggy waffles, you will be able to find this location on the map. Now, sometimes there are more established terms to describe what the objective is. For example, if you see people saying quote-unquote ours, it usually refers to our natural objective point. So in Hypergate, the left pylon coming out of spawn is the natural for Starforge. The left nodes on Yavin and Alderaan are kind of the defaults for your team. And on Novar, it's the node that's closest to you is kind of your natural. So if you see people saying quote-unquote ours, it's kind of the natural default objective point that your team would default to coming out of spawn. Sometimes there are more descriptive names. For example, on Alderaan, you'll see people referring to the nodes as grass or snow because there's grass at one node and snow at the other. You don't really need to know these terms right out of the gate. They'll become apparent as you play the game more often. So when you're just coming out and getting into the game, it's perfectly acceptable to refer to any objective location as never eat soggy waffles, in our case, east. Finally, 2. This means how many players are coming. If you tell your teammates that there's an emergency and a bunch of people are on the way, that means a bunch of teammates need to rotate and come and help you. Or if you say, oh, there's only 1 or 2 guys, they don't need to send the entire cavalry to handle that threat. So pulling this all back together, Inc. East 2 means that I have 2 people coming to East, so send a few guys to help me out, right? If you see someone calling Inc. East 2, it's helpful to say OMW, which means the same thing it does in real life, on my way. It's a great way to tell your teammates, hey, the cavalry's already on the way, not everyone and their mother needs to rotate to go and solve this problem, right? A lot of the times, especially in objective-based maps, if you're going to be really trying to pump those objectives, you need to be calling out what you're actually doing, where the enemy team is going. And so having that little base shorthand and the willingness to type in a chat, Inc. incoming, east direction, 2 description of how many people are coming, is a great way to establish where the threat is and kind of help direct your team. So that way they're not going to yell at you in chat if you say nothing and then get killed and then lose the node. And then you can kind of point back to the chat and say, hey, I called. You guys did nothing. Then you can put the blame on them. It's kind of fantastic. Another common terminology that you're going to see people referring to is OCDs, which stands for offensive cooldowns. Most classes have a mechanic where they can hit a button and then gain a whole bunch of crit chance or gain a whole bunch of just flat extra damage. So if you see people saying, hey, we're going to be entering a burn phase, pop your OCDs, it means hit your buttons that make you do more damage. Speaking of burn phase, a lot of times in bosses, there's going to be a mechanic where the boss is close to dead, pump damage, don't die. That's referred to as a burn phase. Most of the time, it's the most difficult part of the encounter. Just knowing that people say burn, it means, we're coming down to the end here. Pop your offensive cooldowns. Let's get rolling and banging and hopefully knock out this boss. Similarly to OCDs is DCDs. DCDs stand for defensive cooldowns. I say this a lot. I feel like I kind of breeze by it a little more than I probably should in terms of like not describing what a DCD is. DCD stands for defensive cooldowns. These are abilities that make you take less damage. You should be popping them. You should be aware of what your DCDs do. It's very, very handy. So please be a friend, be a gamer, understand your defensive cooldowns and pop them when you're getting hit. You're going to survive a whole lot longer. Another common term that people seem to get confused by is sap. Sap is an ability that stealthers have where they can be in stealth and they can sleep a target that is not currently in combat. So a lot of times you'll see people say, hey, can you sap this mob as we're running through this flashpoint? They're asking the stealthers to run up, use their sleep dart, use their mind control, etc. to put the target to sleep so that way you can walk by them without having to do the encounter. That is what a sap is. It's a stealther mechanic. They put the target to sleep, but the target cannot be in combat. If you want to stun a target in combat, that is what CC means. It's crowd control. Now there are 2 types of CCs. There's hard CCs and soft CCs. Just know that in general, CC stands for crowd control. It is a stun. All right, it's the way you stop the enemy from doing literally anything. You can see right now we're sapping all these players because they're not in combat. We're being kind of bullies. This is a very stealther heavy match. It's kind of unfortunate for the enemy team. So the difference between hard and soft CCs. Hard CCs, for example, Debilitate that operatives have here, is a CC that you hit the target with. They are stunned for 4 seconds no matter what. Unless they use their breaker, of course. So you can do as much damage as you want to this target while they are hard CC'd. It's a great way to stop them from doing anything and allows you and your team to kind of go ballistic. On the other side of the spectrum, there are soft CCs. These are stuns that will break upon doing damage. So it's great for a target that you want to take out of the fight for a very short period of time, but you can't really do anything to them. So a lot of times you want to throw your soft CCs on targets that are standing outside of the fight. It's like a commando or a Sork that's standing way outside where they're not going to be accidentally tabbed onto. Very, very useful to throw a soft CC into them. But if they're standing in the middle of the fight and you want to do a whole bunch of damage to them, stick with a hard CC. It means you can keep doing damage to them. Another common term they're going to hear, and one that I previously mentioned, is the idea of a breaker. Breaker, also known as Trinket, is your one get-out-of-jail-free card to break from a stun or a root or any form of crowd control. Breakers are very useful for breaking out of especially hard CCs when you're about to die. However, you only get like one every minute and a half or so, so please use them sparingly. Don't just be spamming it whenever you feel like it, especially for like a root. Speaking of roots, roots are abilities that stop the player from moving. You root them to the ground, as it were. It's kind of, it makes sense when you think about it. However, if no one's told you before, it might be a little confusing. I know that I just went through a whole bunch of different options in terms of like terminology, and a lot of this you've probably heard before in passing. However, if you're just getting into the MMO scene, I can understand that there's just a lot to understand. Right? There's no encyclopedia for all things terminology. So if there's a term that you haven't heard before or that someone's saying to you in game, you're not quite sure what it is, by all means, feel free to leave it down in the comment section below. I'll get back to you as soon as possible, hopefully with a relatively reasonable example of how to describe the different terms you're hearing. With any luck, we'll have enough terms saved up in the comment section that I can do another one of these and just like farm free content because, you know, I'm all about it. Speaking of farming free content, if you want to help me with the content farm, send me your VODs. I would love to see what you guys are doing out there and give us a little review and see what we're doing well and what we can be improving on. I don't care if you're pumping 26K or if you're just a 4K objective Andy, like that's totally fine. We can all learn a little bit something when doing these VOD reviews. So if you have any VODs you want reviewed, send them over to bigsgaming@gmail.com. That is 1G on the bigs, bigsgaming@gmail.com. You can either email me the direct file or send me a link to YouTube and I'll find a way to review it. So without further ado, that's all I have for today. Hope you have a fantastic day and enjoy yourself. And take care now. Be excellent to each other. Peace.